This year, history in our homeschool is going to look very different, but the reason why might not be exactly what you're thinking. Welcome back to the Morning Basket Music channel. I'm Leanne, a homeschool mom of two beautiful kiddos and a music educator. And while yes, I do spend a lot of time on this channel talking about music topics, today's video is going to be something totally different, and we're going to tackle the subject of history in homeschooling. So just for some reference, I have a rising 6th grader and 4th grader this year. And for the past 6 years that we've been homeschooling, we have done what a lot of other families do, which I know is very common, in the subjects of math and language arts. My kids are working at their own level. And then for the subjects of science and social studies / history, we typically do family style learning. So we're learning the same things each year, reading the same books and resources. And I will say that has worked really well for us so far. So then why make a change, right? You might be thinking, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? That's usually pretty good advice. For me, planning out this upcoming school year, it wasn't that I saw history as something that needed fixing. It was more like, well, it's already going well, and I see that we have even more room to improve it and make it even better. Let me give you some of the backstory of what history was like for me growing up and attending public school. Dry, bland, and stale. Now, those are maybe words that we would use to describe a piece of bread, right? But in my opinion, that was the way that I looked at the subject of history. And it had entirely to do with the way the subject matter was presented to me, pretty much all throughout my public school education. I experienced it as boring and meaningless facts that had no relevance to my, current life. And so much of it was just memorize these names and dates, take the test at the end of the week, immediately forget it as soon as I, pass the test. And it just felt like this cycle of rinse and repeat all throughout my schooling career. It really wasn't until I got to college and I went to study music education that I had my first class and first professor who really started to make history come alive for me and even seem remotely interesting. So I think it was probably sophomore or junior year, I took this music history class, and my professor was amazing. He was kind of this stereotypical quirky professor, he wore the glasses down on the end of his nose, but he was so engaging. And really the difference for me was when I had to learn about things like composers and the different music eras, he wasn't just lecturing us about the facts. He knew so many backstories about these different people and these different events that sitting in one of his lectures was almost like getting to listen in on some juicy gossip about somebody's life, except the information he was telling was true. And again, it was the first time ever that I thought, wow, maybe history is not so boring after all. I really learned stuff in his class. And by doing it that way, it helped me to connect the dots. So for example, when I had to go have a listening assignment and listen to somebody's composition, but I knew the backstory of what was happening in that person's life, he helped me connect the dots so that I could hear something in the music and go, oh, that makes a lot more sense why it was written that way or why it sounds that way, because I already know what was going on in that person's life at the time. So it just really opened up this whole new perspective. It was a big shift for me to start thinking, this really is interesting, and this is something that I want to know more about. So let's fast forward several years later. I get married, I have a family, we decide we're going to homeschool our kids. And I remember very early on when we were just getting started that I told my husband, I do not want our kids to grow up having this same terrible view of history that I did. Just because I experienced it that way, I want them to learn history in a completely different manner. And I also didn't want them to inherit my negative feelings because I think kids are very perceptive, even when they're young, right? They can tell when you're excited about something and when you're not. So we basically agreed early on that history would be taught in a different way. We're not going to use boring textbooks. We're going to do more story-based learning. We're going to have a strong emphasis on field trips and like hands-on learning, getting to see things and places where important events happened. And I am happy to report we have been pretty successful at sticking to that plan. So again, even if we have chosen to use like specific history curriculums with our kids, they have been very much story-based, and we do a whole lot of reading in our homeschool. So our kids are getting a good mixture of historical fiction as well as nonfiction, and it really has been engaging for them. We have also been very blessed, I realize, to be able to travel with our kids to take them to see some really important places. And so now, several years later, I would say we have succeeded in these goals. It's not that, if you asked either one of my kids, they would say, oh, history is the most exciting thing ever. But I truly do think that they both enjoy it. I think that they have had a much different experience than I did growing up. And I would say, especially for my daughter, in the last year or so, I have seen this spark of curiosity about history come alive in her. She just on her own, she can't get enough of World War II history and Anne Frank. She has gotten so excited about that stuff that she will seek out the books on her own. She does the reading completely on her own, and she has taught me so much of what she's learned, things that I never knew, even as an adult. I would also attribute some of her interest in history all the way back to the Magic Treehouse series when she first discovered those books. She became obsessed with learning about historical topics. And again, I think a lot of that had to do with the storytelling aspect. Yes, I realize they're fictional stories, but they have the accompanying fact tracker books, and it just really got her hooked. So given that history has gone well in homeschooling for us so far, how is it going to look any different this year? Well, we are going to continue doing those two things, reading lots of stories and taking field trips. And this year we'll kind of take the knob on both of those and crank them up just a bit. But here's the biggest difference. We're very blessed this year to be in a situation where my husband can be much more involved in the kids' homeschooling. And so as we were making our plans for this semester, he decided to voluntarily take over the subject of history. So he's done a lot more of the planning. He will do a lot more of the teaching with both kids. And I am so excited for all of us, really. It's not that he's a historian. He didn't major in history, but he does feel pretty passionate about it. And he gets excited learning about history in different ways that really relates to my kids. And it's kind of the way that I feel when I'm teaching people about music, right? I get very excited, very passionate. And so I think we are really lucky that they're going to get to experience this subject with him teaching this year. And it may not last forever, so we're really trying to take advantage of this opportunity while we can. What it will allow us to do with my husband doing the planning and the teaching of history is we can really start to even more differentiate the subject matters for both of our kids based on what they're interested in. So really for the first time, we are kind of splitting apart what they're learning. My 6th grader is going to dive into ancient history this year, while my 4th grader is going to continue learning about American history. We are planning to use some curriculum as kind of our spine and what we're basing it off of. But again, my husband, the one that feels really passionate about this stuff, is able to kind of formulate his own unit studies for each student. So this year, more than ever, I am really excited about the subject of history and just thinking about all the ways that it's going to really come alive for my children. Now, I would love to hear from you all. Have you had a similar experience where maybe there was some subject that you grew up learning in school and you really disliked it or even hated it the way I did, but now being able to approach it in a different way with your own kids in homeschooling, maybe you've actually grown to enjoy it. Ultimately, I think one of the biggest blessings about homeschooling is that we get to learn and grow alongside our kids. And I hope that is something that we will never take for granted. So I hope you all are having a fabulous start to your school year, and I'll see you next time.